So today we're going to see what the Beatles were up to on the date of 12 July throughout the years. First up, George Martin is honored by the Grammy Foundation. This happened on a Saturday, the 12th of July, 2008. The Beatles' producer, Sir George Martin, had been given a career award in America by the Recording Academy's Grammy Foundation. The ceremony at the McCarthy Quad, University of Southern California in Los Angeles, featured performances from Burt Bacharach, Jeff Beck, and Tom Jones in Martin's honor. Yoko Ono and George Harrison's widow Olivia were also in attendance. Yoko and Olivia are here tonight. Paul and Ringo can't be here because they're doing their own tour. They're workaholics. I can't understand why, but they are. I miss a lot of people. I miss so many people who have died on me. God knows I'm old enough. But younger people have left the scene, and I miss them as you do. Great people. John and George particularly. George Martin stated that. Martin is the most successful record producer of all time, with more than 50 chart-topping hits and 1 billion units sold. He also holds the record for the longest run of #1 chart hits in history, spanning 36 years. Next up, recording Winter Rose, Love Awake by Wings. This was done on a Wednesday, the 12th of July, 1978. It was done in the spirit of Ranachan Studio, Low Ranachan Farm, Campbelltown, Scotland. Producers Paul McCartney, Chris Thomas. Engineers Phil McDonald, Mark Viggers, and Tim Summerhays. Wings began recording 2 songs for the Back to the Egg album on 12 July 1978. The songs were Winter Rose and Love Awake. Although presented as a pair on the album, they were recorded separately. The basic track for Winter Rose had Paul McCartney on piano, Denny Laine and Lawrence Juber on acoustic guitars, and Steve Holley on drums. Recording continued over the next few days, although precise recording information is not known. McCartney added bass guitar and harpsichord, Laine overdubbed 12-string acoustic guitar, and Holley recorded more percussion. Love Awake had McCartney and Laine on acoustic guitars, Juber was on bass guitar, and Holley played drums. Paul also sang a guide vocal, and Linda McCartney played mellotron. Then we have Paul and Linda McCartney have dinner with Chet Atkins. This happened on a Friday, the 12th of July, 1974. Paul and Linda McCartney had dinner with country music guitarist Chet Atkins in Nashville on the 12th of July, 1974. The McCartneys were growing frustrated with Wings due to tensions in the band, particularly personal disagreements. The McCartneys were growing frustrated with Wings due to tensions in the band, personal disagreements, and the heavy drinking of guitarist Jimmy McCulloch. During the dinner, Paul played Atkins and his wife Leona their recordings made in Nashville and discussed the travels of the band. He also mentioned a song written by his father Jim and played it to Atkins. Walking in the park with Eloise, Atkins suggested they record it together, which they did on the 16th of July. Paul McCartney from Anthology said, "My father did write a song, only the one to my knowledge, and many years later I said, 'Dad, you know that song you wrote, Walking in the Park with Eloise?' He said, 'I didn't write it, I just made it up.' Anyway, I told him that I recorded it with some friends of mine in Nashville. One of the friends was Chet Atkins, and he brought along Floyd Kramer. We got together and made a little recording of the song, specially to play to my dad." The dinner also inspired a Wings song, Spirits of Ancient Egypt, which was recorded on the Venus and Mars album. After dinner, he suddenly turned to me, and Paul McCartney said this from his book, The Lyrics, 1956 to the present. After dinner, he suddenly turned to me and said, "Are you interested in Egyptian mythology?" It was abrupt, a real non sequitur, but I'm not easily fazed, so I said, "Well, kinda," and he started talking about it. He then gave me this book by Peter Tompkins, Secrets of the Great Pyramid, and it was fascinating. There were some great theories in it, including that the Egyptians knew much more than people thought they did, and that the measurements around the base of the pyramid are somehow connected to the circumference of the earth. How did they know the circumference of the earth? You couldn't go around it with a tape measure, but they figured it out. So I devoured the book, and I treasured it all the more because Chet Atkins, ex libris. Sure what that means. Then we have the mixing of You Can't Catch Me by John Lennon. This happened on a Friday, the 12th of July, 1974, at the record plant, New York City. Producer John Lennon. John Lennon mixed the song You Can't Catch Me for the rock and roll album on the 12th of July, 1974. The backing track had been recorded on the 11th of December, 1973, and Lennon added final overdubs on 9 and 11 July. This day's mixes were unused, and a final stereo mix was created on 9 October. Then we have Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr meet in London. This happened on a Thursday, the 12th of July, 1973. Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr met at Apple's headquarters in London on the 12th of July, 1973, to discuss the future of the Beatles' partnership. The discussion, which extended to the following day, was also attended by McCartney's brother-in-law, John Eastman, and Harrison and Starr's respective advisors, David Braun and Hilary Gerard. John Lennon was unable to leave the U.S., so he did not attend. They discussed Alan Klein's lawsuit against Lennon, Harrison, Apple Records, and Apple Films. Klein had recently filed a suit in New York to recover an alleged $780,000 in loans and advances. Eastman offered to engage the renowned U.S. lawyer David Warner Peck on their behalf. The meeting also inspired McCartney to write the opening lines of Band on the Run. And Paul McCartney said this on July 1974 from the book The McCartney Legacy, Volume 1, 1969 to 1973. I happened to be talking to George at a meeting. We were sorting out some of the Apple business. Someone said something, and George just said, well, we're all prisoners, kind of inside ourselves. Or, inside every fat man, there's a thin man trying to get out. I just took up that theme of we're all prisoners in a way, so I kind of wrote a prison song. And as I say, you could take it symbolically or straight. It works on both levels. Then we have the recording and mixing of Don't Pass Me By, Obla Di Obla Da, Revolution. This happened on a Friday, the 12th of July, 1968, at Studio 2, EMI Studios, Abbey Road. Producer George Martin, engineer Jeff Rimerick. Ringo Starr's first published composition, Don't Pass Me By, was completed during the first day of the day's recording sessions, which began at 3 p.m. and lasted 8 hours. Jack Fallon had been a booking agent for 5 English concerts played by the Beatles between March 1962 and June of 63. They were therefore surprised to see him turn up as a session violinist booked by EMI to perform on the song. Jack Fallon stated in the Complete Beatles recording sessions by Mark Lewis John, George Harrison had jotted a 12-bar blues for me. A lot of country fiddle playing is double stop, 2 notes played simultaneously, but Paul and George Martin were doing the arranging, suggested I play it single note. So it really wasn't the country sound they originally wanted, but they seemed pleased. Ringo was around too, keeping an eye on his song. The violin overdub was completed by 6:40 p.m. Afterwards, Paul McCartney re-recorded his bass guitar part, and Starr added a piano part fed through a Leslie speaker, which included the tinkling introduction. 4 mono mixes of Don't Pass Me By were then created. Starr took home a copy of the last of these, which he later gave to his friend Peter Sellers. The album contained a different mix, however, which was made on 11 October 1968. 2 mono mixes were also made of Obla Di Obla Da, numbered 10 and 11 at the end of the session. These mixes were rendered unnecessary, however, after Paul McCartney decided to re-record his lead vocals on the 15th of July. No strangers to working through the night, the Beatles began a second recording session at midnight, which ended at 4 a.m., and this was the final overdubs for Revolution. McCartney recorded his bass guitar part once again, with some additional lead guitar by John Lennon during the solo section and ending. Both these parts were recorded simultaneously onto track 4 of the tape. Revolution was then mixed in mono 4 times, although they were improved upon further mixes created on the 15th of July. Next, we have the UK EP release of Twist and Shout. This happened on a Friday, the 12th of July in 1963. The Beatles' debut EP, Twist and Shout, contained 4 songs from the Please Please Me album. It was released in the UK on the 12th of July, 1963. One side contained Twist and Shout and A Taste of Honey. The B-side featured Do You Want to Know a Secret and There's a Place. Twist and Shout entered the EP chart on the 20th of July. It duly reached number 1, spent 21 weeks there, and was in the chart for a total of 64 weeks. Wow. Although all the songs were available on Please Please Me, the EP still sold more than 800,000 copies. Released by Parlour, the EP serial number was GEP 8882. The front cover was taken on the 25th of April, 1963 by Fiona Adams. The location was a patch of wasteland near London's Euston Station. Fiona Adams stated, "I have been keen at that time to break away from the conventional Hollywood style of stage and studio shot. To this end, I would ride around on the top deck of the London buses to search out possible locations. An abandoned area had caught my eye at the crossroads of Euston and Gower Street. This was still a London blitzed in parts and awaiting rebuilding. As far as I remember, we all managed to pile into one taxi, the 4 Beatles, myself, and Maureen O'Grady, a boyfriend, plus the camera gear. I climbed down the rubble into a bombed-out cellar, open to the sky, and had a wonderful session with the Beatles lined up on the wall above, who couldn't have been more cooperative." Taken on this single roll of film was the jumping shot, the shot which John Lennon and Tony Barrow chose for the cover of the Beatles' EP album, Twist and Shout. The sleeve notes on the back of the EP were by the Beatles' press officer, Tony Barrow. Tony Barrow stated, "Each of the 4 titles here has been clipped away from the Beatles' number 1 LP, Please Please Me, which had been on the top of the nation's album charts for the umpteenth weeks as this sleeve goes to press. It is equally true that one of the songs, Do You Want to Know a Secret, became number 1 hit as a single when it was released for Parlour by the Beatles' Liverpudlian colleague, Billy J. Kramer. The items lined up on this EP have been designed to pass the audio spotlight from very fairly from Beatle to Beatle, exposing 4 contrasting facets of the quartet's vocal and instrumental ingenuity. At one end of the scale, we have the all-action, all-raving rocker, Twist and Shout. No wonder this has become a show-stopping high spot for the foursome stage act. John must have built himself a set of leather lungs and a throat of steel to turn out such a violently exciting track. The tension eases off with the second number on side 1, Paul McCartney's slightly sad, slightly nostalgic version of A Taste of Honey. The tune began as a memorable jazz instrumental. Paul's clear, sturdy voice turns it into a haunting piece of atmosphere of balladeering. The second half opens with George Harrison stepping forward to chant the persuasive ballad, Do You Want to Know a Secret? Penned by John and Paul, this must have been one of the year's most catchy pop tunes, and George tempers his vocal delivery with an intriguing blend of warmth and wistfulness. For the finale, John and Paul join forces to handle their own self-penned composition, There's a Place, with a fair amount of Ringo's percussive pressure behind their voices. They offer a part plaintive, part punchy performance of this infectious beat number. Whatever time of the year you find yourself reading these paragraphs, it's a pretty safe bet that the Beatles won't be far from the number 1 chart spot. And with a little luck, they'll be number 1 on the bill at your local theater, too. And the final event that happened on this date was the recording In Spite of All Danger, That'll Be the Day. This happened on the 12th of July, 1958. The Quarrymen recorded 2 songs at Philips Sound Recording Services, a home studio in Liverpool, on 12 July 1958. It was the first recording session featuring John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison. The studio was owned and run by Percy F. Phillips and was based in the living room of his home at 38 Kensington, a Victorian terraced house. The Quarrymen recorded In Spite of All Danger and a version of Buddy Holly's That'll Be the Day. The former was credited to McCartney Harrison, with Lennon on lead vocals. Paul McCartney stated in the complete recording sessions by Mark Lewis John. It says on the label that it was me and George, but I think it was actually written by me, and George played the guitar solo. We were mates, and nobody was into copyrights and publishing. Nobody understood. We actually used to think when we came down to London that songs belonged to everyone. I've said this a few times, but it's true. We really thought they were just in the air and that you couldn't actually own one. So you could imagine the publishers saw us coming. Welcome, boys, sit down. That's what you think, is it? So that's what we used to do in those days, and because George did the solo, we figured that he wrote the solo. The recording cost the group 17 shillings and 3 pence and was pressed down directly onto a 10-inch aluminum and acetate disc to be played at 78 RPM. The studio log books record the session simply as skiffle, 10-inch double-sided, direct, 11/3 inch. The precise date has since been disputed, with the former members of the Quarrymen remembering it taking place on different dates. A blue plaque installed on the front wall of the house in 2005 lists the session as taking place on the 14th of July, 1958, a Monday, but the logbook entry for that date does not mention any skiffle group. The songs feature John Duff Lowe on piano, a school friend of McCartney's who was recruited for his ability to play the arpeggio at the beginning of Jerry Lee Lewis' Mean Woman Blues. He later recalled the preparation that it took place prior to the recording. And this is stated by John Duff Lowe, A Hard Day's Right by Steve Turner. I can well remember, even at that rehearsal at his home in Forthland Road, Paul was quite specific about how he wanted it played and what he wanted the piano to do. There was no question of improvising. We were told what we had to play. There was a lot of arranging going on, even back then. The Quarrymen played their 2 chosen songs live into a single microphone. Paul McCartney stated in the complete Beatles recording sessions by Mark Lewis John, I remember we all went down on the bus with our instruments, amps and guitars, and the drummer went separately. We waited in the little waiting room outside while somebody else made their demo, and then it was our turn. We just went in the room, hardly saw the fellow because he was next door in a little control booth. Okay, what are you going to do? And we ran through it very quickly, 1/4 of an hour, and it was all over. The tape was erased after the 10-inch shellac disc was pressed. Philip's custom practice was to keep costs down. However, as the Quarrymen only had 15 shillings between them, Phillips held on to the disc until they returned with the full amount. And Paul McCartney from Anthology stated, when we got the record, the agreement was that we would have it for a week each. John had it a week and passed it on to me. I had it for a week and passed it on to George, who had it for a week. Then Colin had it for a week and passed it off to Duff Lowe, who kept it for 23 years. In 1981, Lowe had the disc valued by Sotheby's, and it was reported by Sunday Times journalist Stephen Pyle. John Lowe said, from A Hard Day's Right by Steve Turner, before midday on that Sunday, Paul McCartney had called my mom in Liverpool. I eventually spoke to him on the phone, and we had long conversations over the next few days because he wanted to buy it from me. I was living in Worcester at the time, and he sent his solicitor and his business manager up. I deposited the disc in a small briefcase at the local Barclays Bank, and we met up in a small room the bank kindly let me use. The deal was done. I handed the record over, and we all went home. Lowe is known to have rejected an initial offer of £5,000, although the final amount paid by McCartney was not disclosed. After taking possession of the single, McCartney arranged for sound engineers to improve the sound quality as much as possible. He then made around 50 copies, which he gave to family and friends. Paul McCartney stated in Anthology, I ended up buying it back for a very inflated price. I have since had some replicas made. I don't want to play the shellac because it would wear out, as demos in those days would, but it's great to have. The songs were eventually released in 1995 Anthology 1. It's believed that a repeated verse and chorus toward the end were edited out for the album. The song has since occasionally featured in McCartney's live shows, most notably during his 2005 World Tour and 2022's Got Back Tour in North America. I will end the video here. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, It would help the channel to grow as well as give it a thumbs up. It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. More importantly, I want to wish everyone a good day. Tune in again soon for another episode of The Beatles Forever, The Beatles on This Date. Thank you. Bye.